These government payments allow producers to price their goods below the cost of production without going out of business. Although the ostensible purpose of internal subsidies, or what we call as the price support in the United States, is to allow producers to compete against imports in the home market, and that of external subsidies is to allow producers to compete in the international market. Both in effect aid domestic producers. In the international system, it may be hard to distinguish between external subsidies and dumping, in which one country sells or dumps its products in a foreign market so far below the cost of production that it causes other producers in that market to go out of business. The next topic is the balance of payment. Another important concept for understanding international economic relations is the balance of payment. Much like companies, states keep balance sheets that presents their transaction with those of the rest of the world. A country's trade balance, or what we call exports of goods and services minus the imports of goods and services. The sum total of a nation's imports, exports, foreign aid, and other government transaction and investment income and payment is referred to as the current account balance. If the current account balance is positive, the country enjoys a trade surplus, or a net profit from trade. And if it is negative, the state has a net loss, or the trade deficit. Even though consumers in the state will still be better off as a result of trade because they are able to buy less expensive and higher quality imported goods. The next topic was the money makes the world go around. International trade has focused on goods and services, but as we all know, almost all trade involves money in some form. This system was inefficient because, in the first place, it was difficult to establish rates of exchange between goods and services. Second, in a barter system, there must be a coincidence of wants. Every party must want exactly what the other has offered. And the third, many commodities are perishable and might not last long enough to trade. The next one is the exchange rate. Trade is being conducted somewhere using the US dollars, the Japanese yen, the Israeli shekels, Brazilian reals, South African rands, Norwegian crowns, Malaysia ringgits, and others. Fixed exchange rate system arise when nations agreed to establish a set of currency rules. The two examples of such a system are the gold standard in the year 1870 to 1914 and the Bretton Woods system in the year 1945 to 1973. The last one is the capital markets. Stock markets in which company stocks are traded electronically and in stock exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, the German Deutsche Börse, the Helsinki Stock Exchange, the Ghana Stock Exchange, the Ljubljana Stock Exchange in Slovenia, and the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange. Of all the capital markets, foreign exchange markets where currency is traded stand out as the fastest growing since spotlight day traders find new outlet. And the last one is the foreign exchange markets operate around the clock, with the major centers located in the London, New York City, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Singapore. Advances in technology have made transaction not only possible at all hours, but also cheaper and quicker than stock exchange trades. Partly because of this, foreign exchange trading is far greater than stocks trading and dwarf trades in goods.
So our next topic would be the foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment, it is an investment in business in one country by a firm from another country. It is a private corporate investment in foreign countries, including greenfield investments and mergers and acquisitions. Greenfield investments is a developing so greenfield investments develops an industry from scratch in a foreign country. And it involves the development of production facilities, often from the ground up, including construction, staffing the new business, and creating a customer base. In contrast, mergers and acquisition simply involve buying existing business. Greenfield investments create more jobs and more tax revenues for local governments, but are less popular with MNCs because of the startup cost. Most FDI takes place between developed countries, although the percentage of FDI being spent in developing countries is on the rise, and many developing countries have amended their rules and regulations to attract more FDIs, like cash grants, tax concessions, and subsidies are popular incentives, although some countries go further, adjusting local infrastructure, training citizens in useful skill, or even reworking existing bureaucracy to reduce red tape to improve timeliness. Some states create new staff and governmental offices to smooth companies' efforts to invest in their company. And by the way, MNC, meaning the multinational corporation, that's why an example for that is the Indonesia. They created a special office that an internet website dedicated to direct investors. On its website, Indonesia's investment coordinating board lists the advantage of direct investment in the country. Among these, its fertile land, strategic location along sea lanes, large populations, market-oriented economy, and democratic government. And the site further offers a rundown to Indonesia's FDI-friendly laws, tax regulations, and specific incentives like tax concessions, import duty exemptions, allowances, and specific incentives, and for importation of goods available locally and special bonded zones with even further exemptions. So if an FDI invested to a country, it is the country's advantage because mas matabangan man ilahang country, so mas mo flourish pa ang ilahang economic status and everything. But despite all these efforts to attract FDI, there is no consensus that such efforts are merited. They tend to be costly, and there is evidence that MNCs look less at incentive packages and more at levels of local development and whether or not a state has good governance. So FDI is not always welcome. However, sometimes there are xenophobic responses to foreign efforts to invest. In the United States, for example, despite its own efforts to attract investment, some groups have thwarted. For example, in the United States, despite its own effort to attract investment, some groups have thwarted Saudi efforts to develop American real estate or build factories. In 2005, Americans rejected two high-profile Chinese investment attempts. First, the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, or the CNOOC, bid for American mid-level oil company UNOCAL, which instead accepted a lower offer from U.S. company Chevron, and Harris bid for Maytag, which was countered and won by American company Whirlpool instead. So let's proceed to the economic power. Economic power. Cynics are the person who shows economic power. Cynics are the person or a person who shows or expresses a bitterly or sheeringly cynical attitude often argue that, like domestic politics, international politics follows the golden rule, and their golden rule is whoever has the golden gold makes joke. International politics follows the golden rule, which is whoever the gold makes the rules. We do not have to be cynics to realize that regardless of our perspective in international trade, control of resources, capital, and other productive assets usually translates into influence in the international system. This is why MNCs, for example, have been able to finance why MNCs, for example, have been able to finagle or to get something in a clever or dishonest way. Such good terms in many countries bring with them vast amounts of capital and financial incentives. Even with their growing influence, however, MNCs cannot compete with states or real power of the international system because in this case of states economic so good case of states economic power forms the material basis for military power as well as a means of leverage and political influence. But moreover, MNCs may gain access to raw materials, but they remain vulnerable to governments. Governments reassertions. But moreover, MNCs may gain access to raw materials, but they remain vulnerable to governments' assertions of control over them, whether through nationalization or policies like taxation and regulations. States thus remain the most important actors in the international economy. A state's raw material population, industrial capacity, technology, and geography all contributed to its strategic strength and vulnerabilities. Let's move on to trade and industry. Trade and industry. Economic power derives not only from geographic advantages but also from a nation's ability to translate those into domestic production and foreign trade. Factors like technology, research, and development capabilities and capital mobility. Factors like technology, research and development capabilities, and capital mobility are all critical to trade and industry. So gross national income, or the GNI, it is the total value of goods and services produced within a country plus the income it receives from other countries minus payments made to other countries. It serves as a crude but convenient means of comparing the economic strength of various countries. GNI also measures the market value of goods and services produced during a particular time period, usually a year, and provides an estimate of a nation's total agricultural, industrial, and commercial output. And the GNI differs from the GDP, which is the gross domestic product, or the total value of goods and services produced within the country, or the GDP, in that the later does not latter. What? GNI differs from gross domestic product, or the GDP, in that the latter does not take into account income earned by a nation's citizen and corporations operating outside its borders, although it does give some sense of relative domestic productivity. It is also a useful way to compare the growth rate of states in both absolute and relative terms. For example, during the 1980s, although the US economy was growing larger in terms of total output, its share world production was declined relative to both Japan and Germany. Because power in the international politics is relative, the relative size of national economy has more political significance than their absolute size. GNI and GDP are not only important indicators of countries' economic strength. Economists also look at per capita income or the income per person or the GNI population. Using joke Using these indicators to examine the present is useful, but using them to accurately anticipate the future is not notorious. Use, Using these indicators to examine the present using these Using these indicators to examine the present is useful, but using them to accurately anticipate the future is not notorious difficult. This is true not only because the indicators can shift quickly, but also and even more so because external non-economic factors can come into play. So let's move on to our next topic, which is the technology. Technology is another factor that plays a major role in the creation of the use of nations' economic power is technology. Technology can create efficiency or technology. Another factor that plays a major role in the creation of use of nations' economic power is the technology. It can create efficiency, especially important as countries seek relatively higher profits and spawn entire new industries because of this. Because of this, countries spend countless funds on research and technology, research and development or the RD, trying to ensure that their technology is cutting edge. So by this let's joke na naman ko. A United States is questionably the world's R&D powerhouse because between the 1981 and 2004, the US outspent the United Kingdom, France, Japan, and Germany combined. A 2008 study confirmed that the US continued lead in innovations. In a 2008 study, they confirmed that the U.S. continued lead in innovation. This is partly a reflection of the enormity of the U.S. economy. U.S. R&D spending has a percentage of its total economy in that period was actually very similar to Japan's and Germany's, bearing out the adage power begets power. Technology can be mechanical, industrial, and electronic. It can be related to medicine, weapons, entertainment, or any of a plethora of other fields. Plethora meaning a large or excessive amount of something. Arguably, the most transformative technologies of the 21st century, those most likely to influence states' economic power, are those that involve moving and using information. Recognizing this, countries have made significant efforts to develop their technological and communications infrastructures, building information highways, and allow information to flow faster and at higher volume than previously imaginable. Because since sa una, before, our flow or means of technology is not that fast or the high volume, we can produce a nation's ability to use the internet and other information networks will be vital to its economic health and growth in the 21st century because 21st century involves the modern days. And although geography, natural resources, and population will continue to be major sources of economic power, knowledge, information, and communication will become increasingly important. In the meantime, however, the US dominates in the realm of information technology. The largest US corporations and smallest American mom and pop business have embraced the internet's possibilities, making their goods and easily available online. They sell their products online on in through online easily to easily get the profit. America's technological supremacy and its tremendous economic strength are closely related, but technology can also serve as an equalizer in the international economy. Technology has allowed for and underpinned the globalization of job market, spreading economic gains from the wealthiest country to developing countries that adapted themselves in the changing world economy by educating and training a technologically savvy and computer literate workforce. So they use the technology as a tool para para ilang matabangan those developing countries to to make their economic status flourish. There is an important caveat to the concept of economic as power. The process of globalization and fragmentation both can act as intervening factors capable of stripping ostensible economic power from a country or enhancing it. And the last part of my report would be the technology globalizes the workforce. And the last part of my report, technology globalizes the workforce. In the early 2000s, big US, Japanese, and European corporations began outsourcing knowledge work to the white-collar workers in developing countries. Enabled by digital technology, the internet, the high-speed data networks, corporations are relying on workforces thousands of miles from their home offices to do everything from data processing and accounting to research and development. In fact, that in fact, such foreign workers are taking on jobs in engineering, computer programming, international finances, insurance claims, processing, help desk support, equity analysis, and even architectural work. So technology plays a vital an important in our technology plays a vital role in our daily life and our for our economic status. And by exporting these jobs to India, the Philippines, China, Costa Rica, South Africa, Bulgaria, and elsewhere, major corporations are spending one-third to half of what they would pay for equivalent labor in the United States. They are running down efficiently and keeping service prices down. So that ends my report. And
So our next topic will be the economics as politics. The mention of international trade usually calls forth two sets of images. One is of leaders getting together in exotic places like Davos or Jakarta and signing trade agreement with much fanfare, conviviality, and talk or ever-expanding cooperation. Then, the second one is business shutting down and factories closing because of overseas competition. As farmers block roads in protest against imported food. So, the international trade is having two sets of images. First is leaders who are going to exotic places like Davos or Jakarta, and then they're going to sign an agreement and a talk on how to expand their cooperation. Then the other one is business shutting down and factories closing because of the farmers are going to protest against imported food. So The three theoretical paradigms discussed in Chapter 2 each offer different prognoses, which is the realism, the liberalism, and the constructivism. So, realism. Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan described natural state of humankind as a war of all against all, a no-holds-barred competition driven by vulnerability and fact. Then, states fight wars with guns and rockets. They fight economic battles, tariffs, subsidized weapons that can be destructive as prosperity as their military counterparts. So, states fights wars with their guns, rockets, and tariff subsidized weapons in order to fight the battle against war. Realists thus believe that all states are in competition for bigger slices of the global economic pie because states seek to maximize their power to ensure their chances of survival. They are sensitive to any decline or loss in their relative capabilities. Then, from the realist perspective, economic policy should be a tool of power politics. So, economic policy is a tool of power politics. Realists argue that economic decisions should be enhanced a state's relative overall standing in the international system, ensuring its security and influence. The government should take measures to ensure a state's positive balance of trade with other states, as discussed earlier that a state exports more than its imports. So, ang states kay more on exports jud siya rather than importing products. Realists continue to advocate for positive balances of trade, production over consumption, and government intervention where necessary or even where advantageous. For example, the 2002 decision by the US to protect its steel industry appeared to be not only the administration's response to domestic political demands, but also the creation of a bargaining chip with key competitors, namely the EU and Japan. Realists suggest that states engaging in free trade under most circumstances nonetheless should be more protective of their strategic resources because the risk inherent in free trade become unacceptably high when survival requirements are at stake. So, ang mga realists ni suggest sila nga ang states while they engage in free trade, there should be more protective of their strategic resources because naa siya risk nga ma-inherent in free trade to become unacceptably high when survival requirements are at stake. So, in general, free trade states understand the possibility that uncompetitive domestic industries will fail and accept the less palatable fact that even competitive domestic industries might fold in the face of cheap foreign goods dumped on the market. So, let's now move on to liberalism. So, liberalism is a theory in international relation which has a strong claim of being just and like that. So, liberalism view toward trade are best characterized by their assumption that unhindered markets, those unfettered by governmental restrictions and protections, are the healthiest, most efficient, and most productive. The international norm has evolved over time from the mercantilism of the 16th to 18th centuries to a broadly accepted belief that a global free trade will best serve the world economic while also most benefiting each of the states within. Because of this, international organizations like the IMF, the WTO, and the World Bank have strongly encouraged, indeed often pressured, developing countries to open their markets, reduce governmental interventions, and privatize formally nationalize industries, and otherwise decrease government involvement in trade. Next. So in liberalism, there are two issues which are number one, there is no pressure, there is no pure rather in free trade. Even the most avid free trade promoting governments retain protection on strategic industries and often on industries with strong domestic constituencies as well. Then the second issue will be that even if there were pure free trade, this liberal approach to the market is not without cost. So kinamas na issue na napusay solution. So the first solution is the tit for tat. Then the second is to set up voluntary rules or institutions to detect and punish cheating. Then third is the international law. So let's now move on to constructivism. So constructivism has two theory, right? The sociological and theoretical. So constructivist scholar John Gerard Rogge challenged hegemonic stability theory and liberal assumptions regarding the natural benefits of regimes in a 1982 article in which he introduced the concept of embedded liberalism. So embedded liberalism is shared assumptions. Embedded liberalism is a shared assumptions among many states leaders that governments should balance economic growth and social and economic welfare. So ang embedded liberalism kay shared assumptions among many states that government should balance economic growth. Nagkuan ni siya na government should balance economic growth. Dapat naa siya'y balanse ang economic growth and social and economic welfare. So, Rogge argued that a particular liberal view of the world in which government were responsible not only for prosperity but also for a peace and well-being emerged. So, levels of analysis and paradigms in review, trade and investment. So, first is the individualism. So, the realism of individualism is individual investors will behave as predatorily as possible. Only government oversight. So, the rules imposed. So, after considering the prevalence of barriers to economic cooperation and the difficulties inherent in overcoming them, the rules imposed by states and international organizations may change. Resources may be scarce or plentiful, and markets may boom or crash. But individuals, at once interdependent and self-reliant, adapt and prosper as best they can. Today, the pace of change is accelerating and the web of interdependence is growing even. So, those are the prognosis of the different paradigms in the so those are the three prognoses of the three theoretical paradigms, which are the realism, the liberalism, and the constructivism. So my report is done, and thank you so much for listening.